Then this is the third thing that I was talking to you about. How do you convert a cylindrical laser beam into a thin sheet of about 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter thickness and quite wide size. So, you see there are three configurations shown here. This is the first configuration, this is the second configuration, and this is the third configuration. So, these are two views. Actually, this first view is side view when you are looking from the side, and second view is when you are looking from the top. Okay. So, these are cylindrical lenses, light sheet optics using three cylindrical lenses, one of them with negative focal length. This is what is shown here. So, you can see this when you look at it from the top, this is square, and when you look from the side, this is like this. So, when a beam of about 5 millimeter, 4 millimeter or 3 millimeter, whatever is the coming from your head, when it goes here, this is going to expand, right. What kind of lens is this? Concave lens. So, concave lens is going to expand the beam, but nothing will happen in this direction. Okay. Then the second lens is plano convex lens, and this is again rectangular. So, nothing will happen, thickness will be maintained in this direction, but this plano convex, this diverging beam will now become parallel, and then it goes to again this kind of a convex lens, which is rectangular from the side view. So, here nothing will happen, but here the thickness will reduce. So, now you have reduced a beam which is about cylindrical, about 5 millimeter, you have converted to a very small thickness and light large width. Okay. So, this is one configuration. Similarly, this is another configuration. Okay. Some typical wavelengths are given here, focal lengths are given here for in top view and side view for each of the lens. Okay. So, this is using two spherical lenses, this is using three cylindrical lenses. So, there are many configurations available. So, some you can play with these lenses, and in fact, if you just want to do a very crude exercise just to convert a cylindrical beam, do we have a pointer here? No pointer? Not the laser pointer. Okay. In the next class, I can show you, you can try this on your own. Take some kind of a glass rod which is cylindrical, which is circular, or if it is not available, take a pen, okay, pen which is transparent, and then just shine a light, laser pointer light through it, and you will see that you can really make it very thin and very elongated. So, this is for very cheap experiments, very quick experiments, we use this, but not for PIV investigations. But this is one of the very simple ways of converting a cylindrical beam into a thin sheet which is quite wide. Okay. So, when you can record the PIV on a single frame and exposing the film multiple times, or you can have multiple frames one time each film exposure. So, both are possible. If you look at the CCD cameras, there are many different types of cameras available: full frame CCD, frame transfer CCD, interline transfer CCD, full frame interline CCD. You can look at the details in the book. Then once you have collected all the information on your film or on your in your CCD camera memory, then you have to import into a computer, and then you have to do the post processing. Post processing means, if you look at the image will be nothing but just a lot of dust on the image, and if you just look at the raw image, nothing will make sense. So, what you need to first do is you have to import it and process it through a dedicated software for PIV image interrogation, and then first you have to replace the incorrect data. There will be a lot of incorrect data because of variety of reasons, such as reflection inside the test section, etc. Then if you look at the data is huge, very large size. I can tell you the optical engine that you have seen in our lab in a 5-second experiment, we just conduct 5-second experiment for understanding the flow. In 5 seconds, you can have very large number of cycles in the engine, because at 1500 or 2000 RPM. So, in 5 seconds we generate 100 gigabytes of data. Now, that kind of data is very difficult to handle. So, first you remove the incorrect data and then you reduce the size, so that you can handle the data properly, and then you put it through the software, analyze all those dots have to be, all the particles have to be identified in 2 consecutive images, vectors have to be made, and statistical tools have to be used for this. So, you analyze this information and then you draw the vector maps, okay, and then you present the information and the results in the form of some animations, which are basically showing the flow directions and the flow velocity, okay, in the cross section that you want to show, okay. So, this actually processing is quite a lot of work. I mean, 5-second engine experiment data takes about a week to do all these 4 steps. So, you can imagine it's a lot of patience is required, lot of painful hard work is required to actually post process the PIV data from an engine, okay. Now, you see, so far we have discussed very general aspects of how you can apply the PIV technique to different flow applications, including liquid flows, gas flows, all kinds of applications, and IC engines also. But let us look at why it is important for IC engines. So, one of the most important thing that we have to understand is that the charge motion within the internal combustion engine, it affects the power output, because charge motion affects the mixing of the fuel with the air, that affects the power output, that affects the fuel efficiency, and that also affects the emissions that are generated in the engine. The combustion behavior of the IC engines, particularly the spark ignition engine, is dependent on many things, which include the quality of mixture processing. If it is not homogeneous, if in some sections there will be more fuel, in some sections there will be less fuel, obviously the sections where there will be more fuel and less air will generate carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons, right. And the locations where there is more air, the combustion, there is a possibility that combustion may be not complete, okay. So, this quality of the mixing is affected by the motion of the in-cylinder flow. Then you have to also understand that there is residual charge from the previous cycle, that has to be mixed well. So, fresh charge and the residual charge resulting from the former combustion cycle have to form a proper mixture, because if it does not mix, it is going to lead to formation of NOx emissions. Residual charge from the previous cycle is called internal EGR. EGR is used for NOx reduction. If it does not mix properly, then it will not be effective internal EGR, and therefore, you will form NOx emissions. In order to avoid it, you have to mix the residual gas with the fresh charge. And then in addition, the certain level of turbulence is required at the time of ignition to perform an accelerated flame propagation. So, you have applied the spark, the flame has started. If you allow the flame to grow on its own, it will grow slowly. But if in that region, if there is a bit of turbulence, it will accelerate the flame, and then if the flame accelerates, the combustion in the combustion chamber will be faster, and as a result the combustion will be more efficient, engine speed can be increased, engine heat release will also be faster, affecting the engine performance, okay, and it will lead to highly efficient combustion. But too much of turbulence is also undesirable. Why? Because if there is too much of turbulence, it will increase the heat transfer from the cylinder walls. So, much of the heat generated inside the engine will be lost through the cylinder walls. So, you just need turbulence is something, turbulence in an IC engine is something which is akin to a double edged sword. If you do not have it, combustion will be adversely affected, it will not be very efficient. If you have too much of it, that will lead to a lot of heat transfer. So, you should have just the right level of turbulence inside the engine. So, therefore, it is highly important to collect detailed information on the in-cylinder flow fields and temporal development during the combustion cycles, and in this PIV has proven to be a helpful tool in order to analyze the air flow inside the engine cylinder. So, before all these optical engines and PIV techniques were invented about 15-20 years back. It was anybody's guess, what is happening inside the engine, but now exactly we know how the motion is taking place, how the combustion is taking place, how the fuel air mixing is taking place. So, this has really improved our understanding of the engine combustion processes. What are the advantages? There could be streak photography, there could be particle tracking, particle tracing techniques. So, the advantage are these are the basically techniques where streak photography means you have a longer exposure time and you have a particle. So, since the shutter is open for a longer time, the particle will move. So, particle instead of being a dot, it will be a line, and that gives you information both about the direction and the velocity, right. So, that is the streak photography. Particle tracing techniques means you have very small number of particles, PTV, you can identify each particle manually, so small number of particles. So, the identification of the individual particle images not necessarily in PIV interrogation. PIV allows measurement of instantaneous velocity on a fine regular measurement grid without significant interpolation. Limitation is that this technique has only technological limitations to achieve a high temporal resolution due to illumination source. Laser power is the only thing that limits, and the recording media frequencies that are available today. These are the only two limitations. So, just to give you an example, if you want to look at the engine flows, okay. So, the engine speed is say 1500 RPM. 1500 RPM would mean that in 1 second the piston goes up and down 25 cycles are completed in 12.5 engine cycles. It rotates 25 times 360 degree, right. So, if you want to if you do not want the particle to move out and you want it to be seen in the image, next image, you have to capture that particle in say next 3 or 4 degrees, crank angle degrees. So, if you just do back of the paper calculation, the time difference between the two laser illuminations is very, very small. How small? It could you require at least 1 to 2 kilohertz frequency laser, 1 to 2 kilohertz. That means the laser should be able to fire at least 1000 times to 2000 times in 1 second. Okay? Only then you will be able to see a particle frozen in a particular plane. One time, and in the next time it is in the same plane, and you will be able to capture it. Similarly, if you look at the camera has to be equally fast. So, normally the cameras that are used capture 50,000 frames per second, 100,000 frames per second, and you know that when you go for such high frequency lasers, these lasers are quite expensive. Okay. These lasers alone themselves could be $300,000, just one laser. Camera could be $100,000, $150,000. So, if you want to look, if you are looking at some of this setup for PIV for engine application, you are easily looking at $1 million, easily. Okay. And these are very, very expensive piece of equipment. So, this is the only technology limitations. These are extremely fast cameras are required, extremely fast lasers are required. Then the integration of them, camera has to talk to the laser, and then the laser has to talk to the computer, and vice versa. So, everything should be in sync, because manually it is not possible to synchronize them. Things are happening really too fast in such studies. So, what I will do is I will now explain to you very quickly one study that I conducted along with my collaborators at Loughborough University in way back in 2002. It is a old study, but still it is quite relevant as far as the understanding of the PIV is concerned. These were the initial days when PIV was just being applied to internal combustion engines. So, basically what we were interested in, we were interested in finding out what happens to, see, in most of the cars nowadays you have 2 intake valves and 2 exhaust valves. So, what happens when you actually deactivate the intake valve? So, now the intake will be only through one valve and exhaust is through 2 valves. How the deactivation of one intake valve or intake port, whatever you may like to call, how does it affect the fuel air motion, mixture motion inside the combustion chamber? So, I think this I have covered. So, basically we were looking at this engine. So, you can see this is a engine, and if you look at this device, this does not really look like a normal engine. So, this is a customized engine because it is being used for a very special application. So, here you have a cylindrical barrel and you can see this optical liner is quite large. This is made of quartz, very expensive material, yeah. And this is the cedar. So, this was an engine which was 80 millimeter bore, 89 millimeter stroke and about half liter, 447 cc with a compression ratio of 10. And this was a pantooth design combustion chamber. Pantooth design means if the combustion chamber is like this, that is called the pantooth. It was not a flat cylinder head, it was like this. So, this was a production grade engine, cylinder head, 4 stroke, 4 valve, rover engine, K series, and this is the fused silica barrel here, and it had a extended piston. So, piston was from here to here, very long piston, and then inside there was a mirror. So, you can see this is the engine. Okay. So, this is the fused silica barrel, transparent section of the engine. This is the piston, and in the piston there is a 45-degree inclined mirror, okay, and you have a camera. So, when you are looking at the camera through this mirror, actually you are looking from bottoms up like this, okay, through this arrangement. And of course, this camera was mounted on some fine traverse, and there is a CCD microscope just to focus. You know, if you have to take the camera back and forth, you can do it remotely. And you see here there was a 2 laser system, dye laser and a neodymium YAG laser, and both these lasers pass through this optical sheet arrangement. So, there is a, you make a sheet and this sheet passes and cuts through this combustion chamber. Here you have the cylinder head, okay, which was a pantooth design, and here is the spark plug, and then here you have the engine control unit. Okay. This is the fuel injector. So, the air is coming here, you are putting the seed here, seeded air. So, you are putting some graphite particles or maybe olive oil droplets you are putting here, and then the air is coming here. So, everything is mixing here, then it is going here. Here you are putting isooctane. Isooctane is octane 100 primary reference fuel, and then this goes inside. The compression is taking place here and the combustion also takes place here. Here is the engine control unit. It is talking through a delay generator. It is talking to both the lasers, and it is also talking to the camera. So, when you press the button, it will fire the laser, and at the same time it will capture the images when the engine is on. Okay. So, that is why every important equipment was talking to the other equipment, and they were totally in sync. So, here basically in the seeded air they were using silicon oil droplets. You could use olive oil, you could use silicon oil droplets, which were average size was 1.4 micron, and neodymium YAG laser frequency double to generate green light was used here. And we were interested in looking at large scale motion and cycle to cycle variation, small scale motions, flame convection, how the flames are growing, and flame geometry. How can you see flames? So, it is very simple. If you see particles, that means there are no flames. When the flames come, they will consume all the silicon droplets, they will burn them. If they burn them, you will not see them. Okay. So, you can do wherever you do not see any seed particles, that means there are flames present in that zone. Okay. So, also you have to understand how the turbulence is going to look like. So, this is the pantooth cylinder head, this is where the piston is. Okay. Suppose there is this kind of a tumble motion, Okay. This kind of tumble motion is taking place. Now, when you put sheet, laser sheet, this will be the plane which will be illuminated. Okay. So, if you are doing the imaging from the bottom, you are looking at from the bottom through the camera. So, at this zone you will see slow velocity, because this is where the high velocity zone is. Then you see this is the zone where the velocity will be higher, yellow color, and then when it comes to this place, here also in this zone the velocity will be slow, and then again you come here, the velocity will be high again, and then here you come again, the velocity will be slow. So, when you look at from the bottom, this is what you will see. You will see a slow velocity followed by high velocity, followed by slow velocity, followed by high velocity, and followed by slow velocity. This is what you will capture. So, when you capture this kind of a sequence, what does it mean? It means that there is some kind of a tumble motion in the combustion chamber. Okay. So, this is just a basic arrangement. If you look at the measurement conditions, when are we interested in the measurement? We are not interested in the measurement in the entire cycle. We are interested in the measurement in the engine when things are happening. And when are the things happening in the engine combustion chamber? Just before the spark is applied, or just before the top dead center, and just after the top dead center. So, towards the end of the compression stroke, and towards the beginning of the expansion stroke. So, suppose 360 degree is the TDC. So, we were interested in 20 degree before top dead center to 20 degree after the top dead center. That is the zone that we were interested in. It was normal running condition, one inlet port was deactivated, engine was operated at slow speed 1000 RPM, because of the limitations that I told you. Faster you operate, the possibility of failure of fused silica barrel will be higher, especially if you are taking such a big barrel. Okay. It's very difficult to withstand the kind of mechanical and thermal stresses that are generated inside the engine. Okay. So, for this the ignition timing was 25 degree bottom dead center before the top dead center. So, you apply 25 degree BTDC and start of injection takes place 10 degree ATDC. So, you see data acquisition was done in horizontal and vertical plane both. So, let us see, these are the two images. This is when you are looking from the bottom. So, now you see two images are shown here. What are these two images? One image is that when you put the laser sheet in the horizontal direction and you are looking at from the bottoms up in the vertical direction. So, when you look at it like this is the picture that you get. Okay. Now, if you flip the arrangement and put your laser sheet through the mirror, so you are illuminating a vertical plane and you are looking at in horizontal direction. So, this is what you will get. Okay. You cannot do the measurements simultaneously for these two. Can you do it? Only one image will be captured at one time. So, essentially, although I am showing you these two pictures 20 degree crank angle before top dead center, but they are from two different experiments, and it is not necessary in the engine. There is always a cycle to cycle variability, right. So, it is not necessary that they are 100% the same, but this is the best that we can do. So, these are the two intake valves and exhaust valves here, and this is what you get at 20. Okay, you can see a lot of movement of air, small eddies also you can see. Here the speeds are shown. So, you see the small zone where the flames are. This is a 10 crank angle degree, this is a top dead center, this is a 10 crank angle degree after top dead center, this should be 20. So, this is 20. So, what I will show you, I will show them quickly just so that there is a story. Although you have to understand there is a limitation here, and the limitation is that all the images that are shown to you are from different set of experiments. So, here the assumption that we are taking is that the cycle to cycle variation is negligible. We are ignoring for the moment, because this is the best that we can do. Okay. So, I will play it again. This is 20. We have already applied, remember, we have applied the spark at 20 BTDC. So, spark is already applied. but you do not see anything, no flames here. Why? Because of the ignition delay. So, you do not see any flames, then you see some flames at 10, this is at TDC, this is 10 after, this is 20 after. And in this case this is normal running, that means both intake ports are open. Now, what you do is you deactivate one of the ports. So, now you can see that one of the ports is blocked now, okay. And you can also see the speeds. Let me show you the speed range. So, here you see the speed is varying from up to 7 meters per second. Okay. So, in all these this is about 7.5 meters per second. The moment I deactivate, the speed rises to 12.5. Okay. So, this is at TDC 20 before TDC, this is at 10, and you can see here some flames are seen here. Okay. This is moving away. So, because one of the port is deactivated, so there will be some kind of a extra air movement. Okay. This is a TDC, this is 10 and this is 20 after. Okay. So, anyway, I do not want to conclude discuss the conclusions of this particular study, because that is not important. I just wanted to show this particular study to tell you how the measurements are actually done inside an IC engines. Okay. So, this is all about that I wanted to discuss about PIV investigations in IC engines. Okay. Now, the next technique that I would like to discuss with you is called scattering. Now, what is a scattering? Light scattering. All of you know, you are seeing me because light is scattering from my face, from my body, from my clothes. Every object you see, because the light falls on it, gets scattered, and that scattered light is captured by your camera, which is your eyes, right. So, basically it is that light interacts with matter. Okay. So, the principle of scattering is that when light interacts with matter, different scattering processes can happen simultaneously or exclusively, depending on the chemical and physical properties of the scatterer material. Okay. Different things can happen. Therefore, scattered light contains information about the material, okay, its size and the environmental conditions such as temperature. Now, depending on this, there are 3 types of scattering techniques that are available. One is called Mie scattering or Mie imaging, the other one is called Rayleigh scattering or Rayleigh imaging, and third one is called Raman scattering or Raman imaging. Okay. Mie and Rayleigh scattering are elastic scattering. What does the elastic scattering means? Elastic scattering of light means that the scattered light has the same wavelength as that of incident light. The wavelength does not change. Okay. So, that is the elastic scattering. So, therefore, in Mie scattering, it is an elastic scattering process, and you have the same wavelength as that of the incident light. The intensity is proportional to the size of the scattering particle. So, if there is large particle from which the scattering is taking place, the intensity of the light scattered will be more. If the intensity of light is small, that really means that the size of the particle is also small. Okay. But there is a condition here, and that condition is that this happens for particles which are large compared to the wavelength of the incident light. Okay. For example, if you have neodymium YAG laser, the frequency is 532 nanometer, right. So, if it interacts with the particles, if the particles are larger than the wavelength, then Mie scattering will take place. If the particle from which the scattering is taking place, if it is less than the size of the wavelength, then this scattering will be called Rayleigh scattering. That is the only difference. Is that clear? So, there is a certain wavelength of the light that you are dealing with. If the size of the particle is large compared to the wavelength, then it is Mie scattering. If it is less than the wavelength, if the size of the particle is less than the wavelength of the incident light, then it is Rayleigh scattering. Okay. So, in Mie scattering, if the particle is large, larger particle will scatter more light, smaller particle will scatter lesser light. That is what is the funda. In case of Rayleigh imaging or Rayleigh scattering, it is elastic scattering, again same wavelength as the incident light, and intensity is proportional to the intensity of incident light. So, it is dependent on what is the intensity of the light, also a material dependent constant, and the number density of the particles. Three things: what is the intensity of the light, what is the material of which the particle is made, and what is the number density of the particles in the medium for particles which are small compared to the wavelength of incident light. So, that is the Rayleigh scattering. Okay. Raman scattering, our famous Dr. C.V. Raman, the effect of Raman scattering is based on his invention in his honor. So, this is inelastic scattering, that means here the incident light, it shows a spectral response, that means the wavelength of the incident light and scattered light will not be the same, it will change, there is a spectral response, and it is shifted from the laser line and characteristic to Raman active molecules. So, if there are any Raman active molecules, light will interact with that material and its wavelength will change, and they do not suffer from collision quenching. Okay. Collision quenching means if when the molecules collide, there is a lot of energy decay, that takes place, and many of the instruments are which are made for different measurements try to avoid this collision quenching. So, that is why many of the instruments are made to work on under vacuum. So, when you have vacuum, there will be very little molecules in the space or in the enclosed chamber, and since their number density will be less, the possibility of collision quenching will be also less, right. So, this is Raman imaging. Now, I do not want to go into details, that is beyond the scope of this course, there could be actually one full course on this one slide itself, but I just wanted to let you know that this is just an open area and still evolving as far as application of these three techniques to combustion is concerned. So, using Mie scattering, what you can do is you can do particle analysis. You can look at particle size, particle shapes, particle distribution, and that is very important for us in engine, right. We are interested in combustion generated particles. You can do flow analysis. So, if you look at your PIV, what is happening in PIV? Light is scattering from the seed particles, and seed particles are how much? Large. They are always like 5 micron plus, they are not in nanometer sizes, right. So, they are much large. So, PIV is nothing but Mie scattering technique, that is the scientific part of it. You can do spray analysis. Where is spray used? In all the engines, gas turbines, all engineering applications, we use spray wherever fuel is required to be mixed with the air, and the spray droplets of the liquid fuels are also larger than the wavelength of the light, right. So, all the spray analysis, whether you do phase Doppler interferometry or you do macroscopic investigations of spray, here also you are looking at particle size distribution, spray geometry, and the technique that is applied is Mie scattering. Okay. And then whatever general imaging task you can have in the combustion area, wherever your target is actually larger than the wavelength of the light, that also you are using Mie scattering. So, there are a lot of applications of Mie scattering in engine related areas and engine imaging tasks. It could be in cylinder, it could be outside the cylinder. Okay. Now, let us look at Rayleigh scattering. So, Rayleigh scattering, what it was also a elastic scattering, but it was from the particles which are smaller compared to laser light. So, all the, for example, if you want to study the combustion process, so when combustion is taking place, very small particles are generated, and these are very small particles, nanometer size. So, if you want to understand combustion, you can use Rayleigh scattering. Pollutant formation can also be studied using pollutant formation in situ, can be also studied using Rayleigh scattering. If you want to figure out total gas density in the engine combustion chamber in different areas, that can also be figured out using Rayleigh scattering. If you want to look at temperature fields inside the combustion chamber of an engine or a gas turbine, that also can be studied using gas turbine. Okay. Raman scattering. So, Raman scattering, here you have Raman active materials. So, light and matter interacts, and because of this light and matter interaction, the wavelength of the light changes. So, this wavelength of the light will have information about the material from which this Raman shift is happening, right. So, for example, if you want to look at majority of the species concentration, what are the pollutant species in gaseous form? They may have some Raman active molecules, and they can give you an idea about the formation of the species in the engine at a particular crank angle at a particular location, right. You can have, this could be space and time resolved. You can look at mixture formation inside the engine combustion chamber. You can look at localized temperatures using Raman scattering. So, all these tasks are possible using Raman scattering. So, this is as far as the scattering techniques and their fundamentals are concerned. Okay. And there is something called self emission spectroscopy. So, now you know other techniques, I am going to go rather quick because there are many of them, and I want to cover maybe today and tomorrow I want to finish it. So, if you look at the self emission spectroscopy, so in self emission spectroscopy, what happens is during combustion many species get excited due to high temperatures involved, and their electron come back to the ground state and emit light, which can be resolved to give the fingerprinting spectra, studying which the type and concentration of the species can be determined. Say for example, in the combustion what happens is that lot of heat is generated. So, because of this heat, the electrons of those species can actually go to higher levels, and when that electron comes back, it emits the energy equivalent to the energy difference between the higher level and the lower level. So, it will give you a certain wavelength. If you do the wavelength analysis, it will tell you what is the species back. Okay. So, this is called fingerprinting spectra. The wavelength, you look at the wavelength, you analyze that wavelength, and it can tell you what is the species and how much is the concentration in the combustion zone. And let me tell you, all these things which I am going to discuss today and tomorrow, these are still open topics, these are not frozen. So, these are still something called work in progress. That means that these are active topics, research is being conducted in state of the art laboratories all over the world, and there are more questions than answers. We understand only very little about many of these techniques. Okay. So, whatever we know, I will try to explain that to you, so that if you want to take up them as your research, you know at least what is the state of the art. The two color method relies on the measurement of the radiation intensity from soot particles which are generated during combustion. The radiation intensity can be measured at two wavelengths. Okay. So, the applications of the self emission spectroscopy is that you can measure the flame temperatures, you can find out what is the flame location, you can also find out what is the flame stability. So, these are some of the things that you can look at. You can look at special soot concentration, that means inside the engine combustion chamber in different zones, what is the concentration of the soot. Okay. You can look at excited species distribution such as OH radicals, CH radicals and C2 radicals. So, these are some of the radicals that get formed during the process of combustion. Okay. So, you can figure out what is the distribution of these excited species inside the combustion chamber, and you can also figure out onset of ignition, when the ignition has started, because the moment ignition starts, all these radicals will start getting formed and destroyed. The moment you see the fingerprinting spectra for these particular species, you will know that now the ignition has initiated or ignition has started. So, now I am going to discuss laser induced fluorescence technique with you. So, first let us understand what is laser induced fluorescence. So, the species of interest is excited using a laser light of a specific wavelength. So, what you are doing is that if you are interested in a LIF of a particular species, you know how much energy is required for exciting that particular species to a higher state, and accordingly you choose a particular wavelength laser. Now, you use that laser and you excite that species to the higher level because you have done the tuning of laser with the energy states. So, now once you excite that material, excite the electrons to higher energy state, the electron move to a higher energy level, and then when they come down, they emit the light of some characteristic wavelength on returning. So, when they come back to whatever level they return, they will emit a particular wavelength light. So, this is called fingerprinting of that particular species. So, this emission spectrum is specific to the molecule. So, every molecule will emit a different wavelength actually, because it gets excited to a level, and there is a difference. Every species has a certain difference in their energy states, higher level, higher energy state and lower energy state. The difference will be different for different species. So, the incident light needs to match the energy level of the observed molecule, and then the LIF signal, the fluorescence signal, that is quite strong and can be filtered from the incident laser wavelength. LIF signal is proportional to the volume of a liquid droplet, leading to a direct measurement of the droplet size. Anyway, I will show you these this spectra, and I think this will make things little bit more clear. Let me just try and expand this figure for you. So, you see here these are the electronic ground states, okay, and these are the electron excited states. Okay. So, now what you are doing is that you are absorbing, you have a pumping source which is laser of a particular specific wavelength. So, the energy will be absorbed and it will go to a certain upper excited state. Okay. From there, it can come back to this state, it can come back to this state, it can come back to this state, or it can come back to this state, because there are many ground states. So, this will give a large number of wavelengths, because the energy difference between these states is different. Okay. So, this signal is called fluorescence signal, okay, and this gives an idea about the species. So, one particular species will give you this signal, another particular species will give you this signal, another particular species will give you this signal, another one will give you this signal. So, if you do the spectral analysis, you can figure out, you already know that if you have this particular wavelength getting fluoresced, what will be the species. This library is already available. Okay. So, by doing this analysis, you can figure out which species is present in your target volume. Okay. Now, you see here, from here if you put the energy and you do not take it all the way to higher vibrational levels, you take it to some virtual level, and from that virtual level, if it comes to let me show this. From here you are taking it to some virtual level, and from here if it comes back to the same level, that means what? It means that the wavelength of the incident light and the fluorescent light will be same. So, this is called Rayleigh scattering. Oops, excuse me. Shall I start? So, if you go to some virtual level, and from that level if you come back to the same level, then the incident light and the scattered light both will have the same wavelength, and therefore, this will be called Rayleigh scattering. Okay. If it does not come back to the same level, then it will be Raman scattering. Now, this Raman scattering can be two types. If it goes from a higher level and you come back to a lower level, then this will be called vibrational anti-Stokes Raman spectroscopy. If you go from a lower level to a higher level and come back to a level which is still higher, this is called vibrational Stoke. This is vibrational anti-Stokes Raman, and this is vibrational Stoke Raman. So, it just tells you from whether the level to go up is lower, it is called anti-Stokes. When the level and which is you are returning is actually lower, then it is called vibrational Stokes Raman. Okay. So, is this clear? So, this is the difference between Rayleigh, Raman and laser induced fluorescence. Okay. So, all this Rayleigh scattering and Raman scattering is happening from a virtual level, fluorescence is happening from excited state, upper excited state level.